Welcome to the Know It Some podcast, bringing you the widest variety of conversational interviews for a well-rounded perspective on life. Because while it's true nobody likes a know-it-all, it's also good to know it some. Here's your host, Steve Platt.
That's right, I'm Steve Platt, and you're listening to the Know It Some podcast, an affiliate of the Big 3 Roll-Up Network. I want to welcome back all of our followers and subscribers. If you listen to the show on a weekly basis, thank you so much for your support, and thanks for referring your friends, because I do see that we have a lot of new listeners, new follows on social media, people writing in saying that they were referred. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The more we grow this podcast, the more incredibly interesting guests I can continue to bring you every week. Before I get into this week's guest, though, I do want to bring something up. We have noticed a large increase in listens to a couple of our past episodes, particularly the one with Roger Madden, which is episode 14, I believe. And in that episode, which was recorded before Memorial Day, so well before the protests in the island of Cuba, well before any of this reached international headlines, we discussed the Patria y Vida movement and the Cuban people's quest for freedom. There were some personal stories there regarding his family's fight against authoritarian regimes across generations there in Cuba, and the personal suffering that many families encounter in Cuba. I could tell you, look, my father-in-law came over as, I want to say he was like 9 years old, on his own, and didn't see his parents until they came over 11 years later from Cuba. My mother-in-law also came over as a little girl with just her father. My mom came over from Cuba as a little girl. So many families had to leave everything they had, their homes, every asset you could think of, come here to this country and start over, start new, start fresh. It is an incredibly personal story to so many Cuban Americans, but right now it's not our story, it's their story. The people in Cuba right now that are starving, suffering, and crying out for freedom, for a chance to live a free life. And so, if you haven't done so already, please check out our episode 14 with Roger Madden, because it'll give you some insight to the situation there that you can't get anywhere else. It's a real personal story you're not going to hear on the news. So, again, I saw a lot of you guys were looking and listening to that episode. I just wanted to share that with all of our listeners. If they haven't done so already, give them the opportunity to go back and check that one out, as well as any other of our past episodes that interest you. Now I can get to today's guest, this week's guest, which happens to be David Ulloa. He's a podcaster over on a different network, not on Big 3 Roll-Up. He's on Woo Bro, which I believe stands for What's Up Bro, but I am not 100% sure. I'm just going to tell you right now that he's on a couple of podcasts over there. My favorite, the real reason I brought him on, is the Mt GEEKmore podcast, which is a really, really cool format. Four panelists choose their Mt GEEKmore, think Mount Rushmore, if you will, their top four with some honorable mentions of a number of different topics within the pop culture zeitgeist. So, 80s action movies or 90s, video games. They'll talk Marvel, they'll talk comic books, they'll talk superheroes, they'll talk, 90s crushes. It doesn't matter. Anything that's out there that you could geek out over, they cover it in the coolest way. Honestly, you're going to love that podcast if you haven't subscribed to it already. He's also rebooting a horror movie podcast called Shiver. It's a different format from the Don't Go Out There podcast that we all love here on the Big 3 Roll-Up Network. You could definitely subscribe and listen to both, because they are both amazing. But he's rebooting the Shiver podcast now, post-pandemic, if you will. And we talked a lot about those two shows. He's a really good friend of mine, best man at my wedding, folks. I think I mentioned that in the interview, but I'll say it up here up front that he's definitely near and dear to me as a person. I really enjoyed this interview, though, because it's not really often that we get to talk shop about these podcasts. You're going to want to follow them. You're going to want to subscribe to them. Here we're going to talk about them, the podcasts of David Ulloa. Dave, welcome to the Know It Some podcast. I appreciate you being on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. It's good to finally have you on. For the listeners, I just want to make the disclaimer that Dave is not just my best friend. He was the best man at my wedding. His son is my godson. And so the number one way to get on the show, I've been telling people, is to be a friend of the host, because nepotism is rewarded here greatly. But more than just that, you're also a member of the is it the Woo Bro podcast network?
Yeah. The podcast network is called Woobro.
Woo Bro. And
Yeah, from there are other podcasts, that belong under that banner.
Right. And so the podcasts that you're associated with most are Mt GEEKmore, which
That's
we'll discuss in a sec, because that is a favorite of mine. I have the T-shirt, been on the ride. But the other one is Shiver,
Right.
which is rebooting. So we'll talk a little bit about both of those. But first, I want to ask you about Mt GEEKmore and podcasting in general, and how you got into it. So how long have you been podding?
So I've been podcasting for I think a little under 7 years. And it's always kind of easy for me to gauge, because it was right after my son was born that I started doing this with Neri, who runs the Woobro podcast network. So it's always easy, and like Link just turned 7, so it's like, okay, well, 7 years now. So yeah,
That's awesome.
About 7 years. I love what we do at Mt GEEKmore, because it's trivial. It's not important. We don't talk about anything important. It's like one of those like escapist entertainment things, where it's like, when I've had a rough day, I don't come home and watch like Schindler's List. I come home and put on Commando for like the 77th time.
Right. Yeah. So doing podcasts for that long, though, I mean, podcasts are kind of blown up recently. You're kind of an OG at it, doing it 7 years, because now everybody has a podcast. You either have a realtor's license or a podcast. Those are the two lanes you're allowed to choose from.
Or both. You can podcast about the real estate industry.
I think I have a friend actually that should definitely do that. Not that, I don't know that anybody would listen to that, but yeah, no, it's really blown up now, podcasting, and more people are listening to podcasts. It's not as, because back in the day with the RSS feed, it wasn't as user friendly as it is now. Now it
was obscure. You definitely, like, you needed to know what you were doing. You had to do it with purpose, and now on your iPhone, you can just open up a podcast app.
Yeah.
And you've got all these at your fingertips.
Yeah, and there's a number of them now. Like, you're not just stuck with the Apple Podcast app or Spotify. There's, countless podcast listening apps out there, and they all have different pros and cons to them. But so you got into it that long ago. How did you find your way into the world of podcasting? Were you invited by Neri?
Yeah, so I was invited by Neri. They the GEEKmore format is it'll be 4 panelists talking about a predetermined topic, and we have to choose the top 4 of that predetermined topic. Kind of like Mount Rushmore has, for the greatest presidents of all time, right? You can argue that, whatever, but these 4 iconic presidents. We'll say that, right?
Right.
So so that's kind of the Mt GEEKmore format. So they were, I didn't come in on the ground floor. I think I came in on episode 4 or 5. And they were doing a comic book. Pretty much, yeah. I wasn't there for the first episode.
Right, it wasn't your brainchild.
Right. Yeah, definitely not my brainchild. I kind of treat it like it is my baby at this point. I'm the stepfather. Not like Terry O'Quinn in the fantastic '80s slasher thriller movie, but like a loving stepfather. Who nourishes and cares for its child. So they were doing a comic book episode and I think it was lamest superhero powers. And they were like, okay, well, I had known Neri for years. His wife Vanessa had gone to high school with my wife Stephanie, and they had remained friends, and so I met Neri that way, and he knew me as this incredible comic book nerd, and so I was like, okay, yeah, I'm in. Whatever you need, I'm there.
Yeah.
And he hasn't been able to get rid of me since.
No, I love it because you guys cover everything. And it's not just comics. I mean, it's toys from our childhood. It's action movies.
Those are fun. Those are fun episodes.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The
video
toys
games.
ones, yeah. Yeah.
You guys...
we try to switch it up and cycle through things. So like we did a movie one last time. Before that, I think it was music. Before that was television. Before that was video games. So we're coming back around to comic books, which we haven't. We don't do comic books all that kind of like a niche thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess they are part of the pop culture zeitgeist and social awareness. Like people know about them even if they don't know all the ins and outs of it. So it's enough, I think.
Yeah.
To merit doing one every 2 months or so.
Yeah, and the listener doesn't need to know a lot about it. Like I listen to Mt GEEKmore almost like an educational podcast for me, because as entertaining as it is, I'm learning about these movies from the 70s and 80s that I've never seen before, right? Or I'm learning about maybe some comic books that I haven't checked out yet or whatever.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like, I don't know, you ever have those people that are like, oh, you haven't seen such and such movie? Like, what childhood did you have? You missed out. And so for me, it's like catch up time. It's like, this is what I missed out on. And I definitely got to check it out. But for anybody who's out there looking for a podcast that covers, just kind of like the geeky stuff, the Mt GEEKmore style stuff, where it's pop culture and Marvel and Star Wars and all that kind of stuff, Mt GEEKmore is the place to go for that. And now with Disney Plus coming out with more Star Wars shows and Marvel shows and stuff, I mean, it's never going to end, the content that you guys are going to have to review.
Yeah, it is very easy to stay in that sort of like geek world, the sci-fi and the fantasy, that stuff. But we take the approach that it isn't necessarily just like geekdom, in the strictest sense, but it's anything that you can geek out over. Right. Like you can be a geek about anything. You can be a geek about baseball cards. You can be a geek about, firearms, cars,
right.
Things like that. So that's kind of the approach that we take, where it's like, can we geek out about this thing? And some episodes are better suited for some panelists than others. We don't have only 4 people on the podcast. I think we have a total of 6 people that are like in our rotation. There's like a 90% chance that it's going to be Neri, Daniel DeBona, and myself, and then the 4th panelist, we'll bring in either Mike Mercadal, we'll bring in Missy, we'll bring in Jeff, one of the original Mt GEEKmore panelists, depending on what the episode is, what the availability is. So it's a nice way to kind of be well-rounded and hit things that everyone can appreciate. I think of it almost like an anthology TV show or like a short story collection, where it's like, you didn't like this one, but we got something for you next week.
Right. Yeah. I also noticed that sometimes the criteria can vary, and it'll say things like, you guys will be like, okay, top childhood crushes, and then some people want to throw like an animated character or something like that in there, and you guys will will debate like what qualifies for the topic sometimes, because people say, well,
Yeah.
that's, we're only doing movies and that's TV or whatever the case may be. And that can get pretty heated. What was the topic this last episode that you guys dropped?
The last episode that we did was favorite survival movies.
Nice.
And that one, most of us agreed on what a survival movie was because we just went with the Wikipedia definition of it.
Okay.
But one panelist kind of took a very personal and strict definition to what to what a survival movie was, and so he was kind of fighting us on some of our picks, and it's like, well, you may not consider it a survival movie, but the world at large does.
Right.
So you kind of got to shut the fuck up. But then when the flip side happens, right, and it's like, well, I consider this to be, meeting the criteria, but the world at large does not. Well, then you're kind of fucked. Your pick doesn't count, and that happened. I think it was 2 episodes ago. We did top one-hit wonders of the 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
And so we use for that, again, like we like to use definitions that can be found online, something that it's very easy to say, okay, well, this is a clear-cut definition of what we're looking for. And so the definition of a one-hit wonder is that it has to track or chart rather on the Billboard top 40. Right?
Okay.
So that's a one-hit wonder.
Mm-hmm.
If it charts there and the artist gets never again a song on the Billboard top 40, they are by definition a one-hit wonder.
Yeah.
So someone when we did one-hit wonders of the 90s, someone put Blink-182 because Blink-182 has only one song that has ever charted on the top 40, and I was like dumbfounded. I'm like, well, this is not a one-hit wonder, and by definition, it was a one-hit wonder. So I had to eat my words.
Yeah, but see,
right?
I feel the same way you do. I feel like that should not make the list because even if it meets the definition, if I'm creating my Mount GEEKmore of one-hit wonders, Blink-182 is not coming to mind as a one-hit wonder.
Absolutely not. No, but this was a person who was not a fan of, forget punk rock, but rock and roll in general. So they saw Blink-182, they recognized the name, and they were like, "Oh, I know that song."
That one
and
song.
So they were like, "Okay, well that." And so by definition, it is a one-hit wonder.
And that panelist never gets invited back. Basically, is how that works.
Well, it's nary. It's nary. If there's a bad pick, like oftentimes it's going to be nary.
Nary, if you're listening, I agree with David that your picks are horrific. I just saw your Space Jam take, which is completely off base. So yeah. So
yeah, it was one of those things where it's like, okay, so is it an allowable pick? Yes. Is it a good pick? No.
No, not
so that was one of those things where like we had to allow it.
Yeah.
But like the second to last episode, Missy picked one where it's like, okay, this does not meet the requirement of a one-hit wonder because this guy has had more than one hit.
Right.
Not just because
not just
whatever
radio play, but top 40.
We had to disqualify her pick, and it was her number one pick, and she ended up without a number. Yeah, she ended up without a number one. She didn't, and not only did she not follow the rules set by the episode, she didn't even follow her own rules. She had played fast and loose with the term earlier in the podcast, and we thought that was it as far as bad picks from her.
But that's what makes the show so much fun is those kinds of discussions and it can be funny, it can be heated, it can be all sorts of things, but really and truly that's what makes the show is calling somebody out. Like, how are you going to put Blink-182 as a one-hit wonder? And most of you guys do the research ahead of time and come in and know that your stuff meets the criteria and can back up and explain where you're coming from. I really enjoy it because you guys interact with the listeners a lot more than my show or most podcasts do. I know in the past, you guys would say, okay, we're recording tonight or tomorrow or later this week or whatever. This is the topic. And then people would submit their own Mount Geekmores and honorable mentions. And that's kind of what you guys do, your top 4 and then some honorable mentions. And then, based on what the 4 panelists have said, you guys create the Mount Geekmore for that topic, right? But now you guys are much more interactive than that because the way that you guys are podcasting has changed, right? So can you explain now what goes on between you and the listeners and the fans of the show?
So COVID-19 kind of changed the way that we were podcasting because we used to all meet up at Neri's house and we would podcast there. And so it was a nice way to hang out and also create some content there. The first couple of weeks of the pandemic, we were like, okay, so we're going to take it slow. Once this thing is over, we'll get back into podcasting. And then we very quickly realized this is not going away.
Yeah.
So we started recording on Zoom. And so we would record on Zoom. We would take the audio that we recorded, put that up for the podcast, and then we would record the video and put that up on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually Neri was like, if we're doing video and all 4 of us are on here at the same time, why not do this live? So we started using something called StreamYard to live stream via Facebook and Instagram and, all that. We would stream the episodes live. So where before we would ask for listeners to submit the episode, their picks for that topic, and then when the episode dropped, they could go back and listen and like, oh hey, they said my thing. Now, like in real time, instead of shouting at your car's stereo system saying, I can't believe Neri would pick Blink-182 as a one-hit wonder of the 90s, right? Now you can call him out live and say, Neri, that's a dumb pick. What are you thinking?
And we need more people to do that, please. If you,
we really do. We really do. And Missy was called out last time for her one-hit wonder pick. So it's beautiful. It's beautiful to see the people call out those that are doing the podcast and say, you with the microphone, you suck. Go away. I could do a better job than you can.
Yeah, I gotta say, so everybody might be listening to this and thinking, okay, they're really ragging on this Neri guy. Who's this Neri guy? For the listeners here and all around the world who are unsure of who we're speaking about, this is Neri Sands. He's a very funny stand-up comedian. Actually, to me, he's one of the better stand-up comedians that does crowd work. That's one of my favorite things that he does.
He's kind of unmatched in that department, I think.
He really is, and he's performed on cruise ships. He's performed at comedy clubs all over the place. He's open for the likes of Dave Chappelle. So that should tell you what kind of a comedian he is. And Neri is from the Miami area, very popular in the Miami area, and one of the faces behind the Woo Bro Network, and obviously a panelist here on Mt GEEKmore with, I agree with Dave, the worst picks of all the Mt GEEKmore panelists. But that's what makes the show so incredibly entertaining, is these discussions. Because if they all agreed, right? If all 4 panelists agreed, and it wouldn't be much of a show at all. And what's great is that Neri's terrible picks are not an act for the show. That is legitimately how he feels. About
he wears his heart on his sleeve. Like he is who he is. Who you see on those live podcasts, like that is Neri. There's no act there.
No, not at all. And so it really makes a show. If you're into, because a lot of people are getting more and more into, especially with the rise of more Star Wars and Marvel content. If you're into anything geekdom, nerddom, Dungeons and Dragons level kind of stuff, if you like Stranger Things, this is the podcast for you. It's called Mt GEEKmore. I want to switch tracks real quick and talk about Shiver, because I'm really excited that you are rebooting Shiver. I will quick disclaimer, the podcast network that I'm affiliated with, we have a horror movie podcast called Don't Go Out There. It's incredible. It's great. So
that's a good name.
Yeah, I love their show, 4-panelist show, great guys, great friends, and very supportive of Know It Some. But they do a different thing, and you can listen to both. So if you're into horror movies, check out Don't Go Out There, but also check out Shiver, because it's very different, the formats. Tell me a little bit about the Shiver horror movie podcast.
So Shiver, unlike Mt GEEKmore, is that was my brainchild. So that was something that I established when I found out that Jeff, one of the original GEEKmore panelists, was really into horror movies, and I was like, but I'm really into horror movies. We should do this together. And because Neri is like so good at podcasting, he was like, well, let's all do this together. Right. And he's got this great podcast network, and everything he does creatively is really good. So, having him involved was a smart idea, right from the get-go. Absolutely. But Neri is not a horror movie guy. He's always said he's a scaredy cat. He's going to close his eyes. He's going to scream. So naturally, it's a good kind of person to have in there, because it gives you this sort of like counter view to, like, it's when Jeff and I watch a horror movie, we're more inclined to like it. Yeah. Whereas when Neri watches it, he's already going in saying, I'm going to hate this thing. So it's a nice, a counter view to what's going on there. So so the format of the show is one of the panelists will pick a movie, and this will be either a movie that they really don't, right? So Jeff has an affinity for like really bad B movies, like the Sharknado stuff, right? No. But he enjoys them for how bad they are, and to a degree I do as well. There's a sense of you're laughing at this thing, not with this thing. But if the movie is aware of itself, you're also laughing at it and with it. So there's a lot of enjoyment with that.
That makes it a comedy movie, I believe.
yeah, but I mean, you can have a horror comedy, certainly.
There you go.
So we would take whatever the pick for that week was, and I would do a mini episode before we got to the meat and potatoes, which I called "What the Actual F***." And these little episodes were inspired by the movie, but they would go into real life horror stories.
Right.
So, for example, when Jeff picked Hatchet, Hatchet is like a 2000s throwback to the late 70s and early 80s slasher movies. In fact, Robert Englund, who famously played Freddy Krueger, has a pretty cool cameo appearance in it. So because it takes place in the bayous of Louisiana, I said, okay, you know what? Let's go into some of the real life horror that has happened in New Orleans, because the movie starts in New Orleans. So I would do a little bit of research. I'd find some of like the really scary real life stuff that's happened in New Orleans, and then I'd present these as either unsolved mysteries or like making a murder style stuff. And so this would kind of help set the tone for the movie. And then the idea is that we would have watched the movie before, and then we do almost like a critique or a movie review. Yeah. So that leads to interesting discussion on filmmaking. It leads to discussion on horror as a genre. And I think if you're a fan of movies, if you're a fan of horror, or both,
right,
it was an interesting podcast to listen to and learn, the original idea was like, hey, we're going to take like a critical approach to horror. And of course, because Neri's there's going to be a lot of comedy that's thrown in along the way.
Absolutely. Now, you have taken a hiatus and you're completely rebooting it. When is the first episode? Has it already come out?
The first episode is not out yet. We had decided we were going to do Fear Street, the new movie trilogy that just came out on Netflix, and the last the last film came out on Friday.
Okay.
Friday last. So we need time to finish watching it. I'm assuming that we will record next week. So either this week or next week. So we can expect the episode to come out by the end of July, and then hopefully find our rhythm and do it there. I don't want to commit to one a week. That might be too much. We have a lot going on. Everyone who's involved in the podcast, but maybe every other week. And especially since we do 2 episodes, the actual episode and the main episode. Yep. It's a good way to kind of break it up and it'll be fun. So I'm really excited about it. Fear Street is going to be the first one. The next pick we've already decided, because Daniel, this is the first time that he's coming on board, and he's been with Mt GEEKmore for over a year now.
Wow.
And he's been friends with Neri for a very long time, and he's been podcasting on his own for a while now. And his pick is Rosemary's Baby, which is a fantastic movie. So I'm really excited to get back into this. I have been a horror fan since I first saw Night of the Living Dead back when I was in middle school, and so I'm really excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in this household, my wife is more like Neri in that she is not a huge fan of the genre. She'll watch them with me and enjoy a lot of them, but the ones that we tend to enjoy are suspenseful, things like Quiet Place, The Strangers, etc. But then what I like to do
The Strangers is so good.
That is one of my, if not my favorite, horror movies, because you don't have to suspend belief to believe in an alien or a ghost or a paranormal activity, a poltergeist. Nothing. You don't have to suspend belief in any which way, because it's just human beings that were bored. It's like that line towards the end of the movie. It's like, why did you do this? And they're like, because you were home. Yeah.
And, it's so creepy.
It is so creepy and so good, and just an incredible movie, because they didn't have to jump the shark very much to get you scared. You know what I mean?
Well, it was based on the Manson murders in the 60s.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And honestly and truly, if you ever do that episode and you need an extra panelist, let me know. But that movie is incredible. I could watch it over and over.
Did you watch the sequel, The Strangers Prey at Night?
No, I have not.
It's really interesting, because The Strangers is very much a 1970s thriller, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it takes place in the 70s, so that makes sense, right? But the natural progression is, if the last one took place in the late 70s, the next one's going to take place in the 80s, right? And so you have this very 80s vibe to the second one. The soundtrack, even the way it's filmed, it has a very 80s slasher feel to it. Gotcha. And so it's a very different kind of movie from the original Strangers, but it's the same 3 masked killers from the first one. And they're presented in a different way, but it's still as scary as the first one. And I loved it. I thought it was fantastic.
That reminds me. So are you guys just covering movies? Are you ever going to touch maybe a TV series like American Horror Story and stuff like that, or is it just going to be a horror movie podcast?
So the full title is Shiver, a horror movie podcast. However, when The Haunting of Hill House came out in, I think it was 2018, we did a 2-part special on The Haunting of Hill House. And
so you reserve the ability to go outside of just movies.
It's my baby. It does whatever the I tell it to.
There you go. Yeah, this will be, ladies and gentlemen, the first episode of Know It Some to have an explicit rating on it. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, we're setting history here. No, but honestly and truly, it's really a pleasure to watch what you guys do as podcasters. I'm very new into it. I rebooted this podcast in late March of this year. You guys have been doing it for years and years now, and definitely were an inspiration into what this podcast has become. So it means a lot to have your guidance, man, and your friendship. Definitely want people to check out both Mt GEEKmore and Shiver. Where can they find these podcasts on social media? Where can they subscribe?
You can find us on anywhere that podcasts are found,
Awesome.
whether it's going to be the iPhone podcast app or on Podbean or anywhere, because we kind of submit it to like one place, and then we link all the different podcast,
Mm-hmm.
or at least the major
The major
podcast
platforms.
mediums to there. So you can pick it up from any one of those places.
Nice. And where can they find you guys on social media? Where can they find you on social media?
On social media, you can find us on Twitter, on Instagram. I think that's pretty. I mean, I know that we have a Facebook, but I don't know how often Facebook is updated. I can tell you that Shiver has been dead because I didn't do anything with it while we were on. Yeah, appropriately. While we were on hiatus, but you can expect to see some more posts from Shiver. GEEKmore is always posting stuff. So and that's a cool page to follow, our Facebook page, our Instagram page.
So just search for Mt GEEKmore.
MT GEEKmore, yeah.
MT GEEKmore. Okay, guys.
MT GEEKmore. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And man. Shiver. I think everything is Shiver Pod.
Okay.
So look for Shiver Pod for all of our social media.
Nice, very nice, man. Well, I'm definitely going to be hitting you up soon because I'm finishing up the Loki series on Disney Plus.
It was great. I loved it.
Yeah, I'm really loving all this extra content. I don't like waiting a year between Avengers movies or the Guardians of the Galaxy movies or anything like that. I like having a consistent stream, and they're being very, very generous with content all over Disney Plus, yeah. Whether it's The Mandalorian or Falcon and Winter Soldier or whatever the case may be. And so I'm loving it. It's getting my geek on. Definitely we'll have to have you back on sometime, Dave, but this has been a pleasure. Really appreciate it. And
I promise to drop fewer F-bombs next time. I'm sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, my best friend, Dave Ulloa, thanks for coming on, man. Talk to you soon.
All right, man. Take care.
And that'll do it for another episode of the Know It Some podcast. My thanks again to this week's guest, David Ulloa. Folks, do yourselves a favor and go on and subscribe to the Mt GEEKmore podcast. And while you're at it, go subscribe to Shiver podcast as well. But I'm telling you right now, that Mt GEEKmore podcast, it needs to be in your rotation. It is incredible. I love it. I know you'll love it. And David, thank you so much for telling us about it here on the show. If you haven't done so already, folks, please head on over to social media. That's any social media platform, and follow Know It Some Pod. Whatever your preferred platform is, stay informed. Stay tuned to our new episodes by following Know It Some Pod. That's on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, you name it, we're there at Know It Some Pod. But the best way to support the show and to help us continue to bring in interesting guests every week is by giving us that 5-star ranking on Apple or iTunes. So if you haven't done so already, stop what you're doing, head over to iTunes or Apple, give us that 5-star ranking. Thank you so much for all the support and love, and I'll see you next week.